Good afternoon. This is Bill Wilson with Wilson and Wilson Estate Planning and Elder Law. I am one of the Wilsons in the firm name. The other Wilson was my dad, who started the firm in 1963. As you may know, our firm concentrates in estate planning, elder law, and special needs planning. We have offices in LaGrange, Northbrook, and satellite offices in Warrenville and Orland Park. This afternoon, we're delighted to discuss the important topic of family meetings. Kevin Doherty from UBS will introduce his colleague, Sarah Solomon, who will give a short presentation on family meetings. We will then have a panel discussion followed by your questions. And our moderator for that panel discussion is Kristen Plotkin, who is Kevin's assistant. Let me tell you a little bit about Kevin and his firm. Kevin Doherty is a very successful financial advisor at UBS, and he leads a wealth management practice based out of Oak Brook that helps individuals and families navigate the economic, political, and social challenges of today's world. One of the biggest challenges Kevin and his team are often faced with is helping families better communicate amongst themselves. If you are like many families, financial matters can be one of the most difficult topics to discuss. Over the last 30 years, Kevin's group has worked with families to best coordinate their efforts to ensure a high likelihood of long-lasting success. We've asked Kevin and a couple of his team members from UBS to join us today to help us better understand how to harness the power of intentional communication through family meetings. Kevin?
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you having us today, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar to discuss this important topic. As Bill mentioned, Kristen and I work as a part of the Doherty Group, which is a wealth management practice at UBS in Oak Brook, Illinois. And there, our team really works with families to best coordinate their efforts to ensure a high likelihood of long-lasting success, like Bill mentioned. And today we're here to discuss how opening lines of communication within your family around financial matters can really, I think, do two things. One is to avoid some potential pitfalls that we tend to see happen and some challenges, but also it can lead to some really great conversations and results. So I think one of the benefits of working at a global firm like UBS is we get to have the pleasure of working with a lot of great experts and professionals, I think both external to our firm in terms of folks like Bill and his firm, but also internally. So today I asked two of our really great partners from UBS to join us. As Bill mentioned, Kristen Plotkin is a financial advisor with me at the Doherty Group at UBS. Kristen lives in Chicago, is based out of the Oak Brook office, and she'll help us lead a panel discussion really to uncover some tips and resources and some real life experiences that Sarah, Bill, and myself have all gone through to just kind of uncover them and see how you can use them in your own situations and with your own families. And along with Kristen, joining us is Sarah Solomon. Sarah is an executive director at UBS in our Family Advisory and Philanthropy Services Group, which is always difficult to say. And in her role, Sarah works with families really on the topics of understanding money, kind of aligning values and philanthropic intent in the context of family wealth. A big part of Sarah's role is to help facilitate family meetings for high net worth and ultra high net worth families. And I think one of the great benefits of having Sarah with us today is that she can help us learn from those experiences and kind of take some of the lessons learned and apply those to our own situations. And so, as Bill mentioned, to start things off, we've asked Sarah to take about 10 minutes to really set the stage and discuss some of the challenges she commonly encounters with flourishing families, the importance and benefits of a family meeting, and if she's done a good job and sold us that we should have one, where do we start and what do we talk about? So we'll turn it over here to Sarah shortly, and then after that we'll get started with our panel discussion. I always like to say on these type of topics, if we do a good job, we should answer some questions that you may have, but you should also walk away with some questions to consider for yourself and for your family. So that's our hope for today's meeting. So I'll turn it over to Sarah, who will walk us through some great information on the challenges and dynamics of family meetings.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Bill and Kristen. Really glad to be here with all of you today. As Kevin was mentioning, I'd like to set the stage and first begin by learning from some others' experiences. The good news is there have been many that have gone before us that have done effective estate planning and used intentional communication. And so what can we learn from what has gone well and what could have gone better? I want to draw your attention to the first slide, where in a seminal study in the field of wealth transition, we can learn from what the opportunities are for those of us who are thinking about the future, from what did not go as planned from those who came before us. And what we learn from studying wealth transfers that have already occurred is that there is a significant risk to wealth transfer going as planned without intentional communication. 7 in 10 wealth transfers don't go as planned. And the reason being has little to do with the technical elements that teams and professionals like Bill and Kevin and Kristen take such good care of. The mishaps, the could have done better, fall into the categories of communication and need for heir preparation. 60% of the time, wealth transfer does not go as planned because of a breakdown in communication or trust. And I attribute this to something very simple, not so profound as communication, rather conversations. And so that's why we believe that family meetings are critically important as a complement to the planning work that you're doing with your trusted advisors and professionals. The other thing that has a big impact on the success is heir preparation through education and understanding personal finance as a bridge to future wealth management responsibilities. On the next slide are 2 of my favorite quotes. One comes from a longtime philanthropic advisor by the name of James Collier, who wrote a book called Wealth in Families. And on one of the first few pages of this book, he said that the most critical challenges families face are rarely financial. When we lay our head down on the pillow, are we thinking about finances, or are we thinking about how our kids and family members will realize their hopes and dreams? And what are the challenges that are happening within and among our family? The second quote comes from the writer George Bernard Shaw, who said the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So often we're working with client families and it's as if we set up a game of telephone, where you pass the statement line to line, and suddenly there's been things that are lost in translation. And so how can we use family meetings to overcome those miscommunications or misunderstandings? On the next slide, you'll see some of the questions that we think about with client families. We, as a global wealth manager, think a lot about financial capital, and we also think about qualitative capitals, that a family's true wealth is measured by the family members themselves. And therefore, we need to take into consideration human, social, intellectual, and spiritual capital. How can we do that? These are some questions that we suggest thinking about, pondering about as individuals, as couples, as families, to think about how you're addressing the qualitative capitals that exist within your family. What do we want our family's legacy to be? How does my family work together to make decisions? Do I talk to my family members about wealth? UBS did a study back in 2014 that we called Begin Before the End, where we surveyed investors about their comfort level in initiating conversations about future financial plans. And should the current wealth holder begin those conversations, or should recipients or inheritors begin those conversations? The study concluded that it's uncomfortable for everyone, but it is important for all. And if not addressed, then some of these questions don't ever get answered. And so it's important for the current wealth holders to initiate these conversations. Moving on to the next slide, what are the benefits of having a family meeting? We can think of these benefits in three distinct categories: communication, development opportunities, and preserving the family's history and story. With communication, when you have intentional family meetings or family conversations, they really work to understand expectations, individual expectations and collective expectations. Family meetings can serve as an opportunity to move from informing to engaging, inspiring, and evolving family members. And also, they serve as a simple way to understand the expectations of others. In development, family meetings can be useful in replacing criticism with honest inquiry or inviting curiosity. They can also serve to protect privacy and confidentiality and illustrate care through active listening. They're also a wonderful opportunity to practice patience and kindness. And when it comes to preserving family stories and the ups and downs and the arc of life that happens over any family's lifetime, family meetings are important for that, because one of the antidotes to the phrase shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations is telling and retelling family stories. And family meetings can be a great venue for that. Moving on to the next slide, we need to be realistic that family meetings may not be for everyone. And so there are reasons to avoid them. If parents are not yet comfortable sharing their wealth or future estate plans with kids, then it may be too soon to begin this. It's been my experience doing hundreds and hundreds of family meetings that when we first introduced this concept, wealth holders think of their options as binary. On one hand, they think that if they have family meetings, that it means they must reveal everything. And on the other hand, they take these conversations so seriously that they don't want to get started. In our work, we think of the options as more akin to a dimmer switch, that you can build a gradual path towards transparency. And that's what we work with client families and their other professional advisors on doing. What do we talk about in family meetings? Well, we often start with values. What are the family members' individual values, and what are the shared values amongst the family? And how does each family member picture the future? How can we invest in each other's dreams and support one another? It's very important when we're facilitating family meetings that we start everything with what the client family's objectives are. What are their objectives for having a family meeting? What are topics they want to discuss? Most importantly, what are topics they do not want to discuss? We are never looking to make this uncomfortable or go at a speed faster than the client family wishes to proceed. So here you can see a list of lots of different topics, things as simple as personal updates, financial education, of course, estate planning reviews, family decision-making, communication style assessments, and so on and so forth. On the next slide, you can see an evolution of family meetings. The way that I think about family meetings is like taking a trip to the beach. Now, not every family member is going to show up at the beach and drop their things and run headfirst and dive right in to the cold water. Some are going to spend their time getting a beach chair. Others are going to make sure there's no sand on their towels. Some are going to walk to the seashore and go up to their ankles. And one person might dive right in. And so what we wanted to illustrate here is that there is a continuum, that the first meeting may be confirming and talking about family values and stories. And then maybe in the second meeting, there's a review of the family's philanthropic involvement, the boards that you've served on, why those causes are important to you, and some financial education. It might not be until the third meeting that you feel more comfortable with the age, stage, and readiness of future wealth recipients to start talking in some general terms or maybe even some detail around estate planning. And these meetings can be ongoing on an annual basis. So that was what I wanted to lay the groundwork on in terms of family meetings and the way that we think of them.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, thanks so much for helping us set the stage for our discussion today. Over the next handful of minutes, I think what we really want to do is leave you in a place where you know how family meetings can help your family flourish, where you understand the power of intentional communication, that you'll have a roadmap for how to have effective family meetings and some tools to help you along the way. But most importantly, that you feel inspired and ready to start taking the next steps to engage your family. So we'll do this, as we all mentioned, in a panel format where I have some questions lined up for Sarah, Kevin, and Bill. But please feel free to use that question and answer feature within the Zoom meeting to add some questions that you'd like to ask as well. And we'll be sure to incorporate those in our discussion along the way. And I'll remind you of this again further along. If you do run into any issues, you've probably noticed by now that you're all muted and your video cameras are off, but please feel free to use the chat feature and chat to the Wilson and Wilson attendee, and Kayla will assist you with any issues that come up. But let's go ahead and get started. Sarah, the first question here is for you. And I think just if you could speak to who are family meetings relevant for? Do you have to have a certain amount of money, a certain amount of savings, or certain issues or anything for them to make sense for your family?
You know, you won't be surprised in my answer because given what I do in my area of expertise, but I think family meetings are for everyone. And I mean all levels of wealth and all ages of kids. Family meetings have to do with communication and conversation. And communication and conversation are a big contributor or driver of family culture. And so it's my belief that family meetings are good for everyone, and it doesn't pertain to a certain level of wealth necessarily.
Great, thank you for that. And this next question here, I think we'll ask each of you the same sort of thing, but just trying to kind of paint the picture of what a family meeting might look like. Some of us might be picturing a Zoom meeting. Some of us might be picturing the whole family sitting around a boardroom with notepads and pens in a very organized fashion. But how formal do they need to be? And maybe could each of you share an example of a family meeting that you've experienced to help us kind of envision what a family meeting might look like. Bill, I guess we'll start with you.
Sure. The family meetings that I have attended are very informal. Many times they're either in our conference room or they're at the place of business where shall we say, the senior person is running, and many times some of the kids are part of that business. So again, very informal. I haven't seen too many pads of paper out, although sometimes they ask for pads of paper when they want to remember something. So it's just a real informal discussion that usually takes place. And what I like to do is, in the family meetings that I've attended, usually we have the attorney, we have the financial advisor, like Kevin, and we also like to have the accountant there too, because as you know, everything has to do with taxes. So we like to have her or his input on any planning that's going on. A bonus would be to have your insurance guy there. So the best family meetings that I have attended were ones that had all of these characters, and also all of the basically the two generations usually are the ones the parents and then the kids, okay? Some have bring spouses along, some rather not, but that's up to the people that are in the show. So that's basically my take and my experience, and very informal. So that's I think that's the bottom line for me.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I think that kind of reiterates something that we see amongst clients sometimes. Is just so often professionals operate in silos, and to kind of bring them all together and the family just really creates for great communication. Kevin, how about you?
I'd say I've been a part of family meetings that cover the spectrum from being informal or even almost an introductory type of meeting where the family really just wants the next generations to start to meet the different professionals that are involved. Like Bill mentioned, the tax folks, the legal folks, the financial professionals as well. But we've also been a part of very structured meetings that have very formal agendas and topics to discuss and expectations of all the members there. So we've seen a wide range. I don't know that one's more right than the other. I just think it's good for the conversations to be happening. I do think that no matter how informal or formal it will be, I think it is extremely important to have an agenda or at least an outline of what will be discussed. These meetings, as I'm sure in most of your families, can be led in a lot of different directions, and I think it's nice to always have an agenda to come back to. In a couple of meetings I have been a part of where there wasn't an agenda, it has become an issue in a couple cases. And I think one tip that I've borrowed from Sarah over the course of the year is to, even if you don't create an agenda, just create a list of things you want to talk about and things that are off limits, like I think Sarah touched on in one of her slides. I've seen that be helpful for kind of the future generations, but I think also for the parents that are wanting to run the meeting. It kind of sets the stage that, hey, if we don't want to talk about dollar values, we don't have to talk about dollar values. And then that's for a later topic or conversation, but there's still plenty of good things that we can cover and communicate upon in the meantime. So I think, in general, that's kind of what we've seen. I think in terms of what they look like over the last 14, 15 months, I'd say we've done more family meetings than we ever have before. I think a lot of that has to do with the virtual environment, easy to pull everybody together in the same room on a Zoom meeting like we're doing today. So I think one that comes to mind is we had a family with 5 adult children that were spread all across the world, not just the country. And they always wanted to do a family meeting, but geography was just getting in the way. And they started to tell me, hey, we have a weekly Zoom meeting during the pandemic anyway, or maybe bi-weekly Zoom meeting. And they said, why don't you jump on one of these and we can start to have a conversation. And that just happened to be the starting point for us to start to have these conversations. Unfortunately, the father of the family ended up passing away 6 or 7 months later, which was sad, but it was interesting to see how much that those kind of important and intentional conversations that took place during the meetings really helped the family as they started to sift through some more challenging decisions and items that they had to cover over the course of time. So at the same time, I think virtual meetings have their own challenges. One of them's making sure everybody's involved, but I think Sarah kind of alluded to that. Not everybody's going to jump into the water at the same time. So I think one thing we found helpful is just to have some questions that you can throw out to everybody in the group to kind of get their opinion or maybe something they want to learn about or something they don't understand, just to get everybody kind of talking and comfortable and involved in the meeting early on. I think are a couple of things that we found to be very helpful.
Great, thanks. And Sarah?
Yeah, I have just a couple of points to add because I agree with everything that Bill and Kevin have mentioned. I see the range of family meetings from, as Bill mentioned, very informal to sometimes more formal. To me, the key is, regardless of the level of formality, to make sure that we bring our heart. I've been a part of some family meetings that all the preparation had been done, the agenda was perfectly appointed and taken care of, and when we got to the meeting, it was all business and not so much heart. And that didn't lead to the intentional communication the family was hoping for. So make sure you bring your heart. Second thing is with the agenda, the reason why I believe agendas are useful for family meetings is because they lead to next steps. When I have worked with clients who have been frustrated about past family meetings, it's that nothing changed or there wasn't any progress made from the last family meeting. So when you have an agenda, that has a higher likelihood of leading to next steps, which leads to family engagement. To Bill's point about professional advisors being involved, I think that is a great practice. And the primary reason I say that is because when you include your estate planning attorney, your financial advisor, and your accountant, they can serve as the facilitators of the meeting so that you as family members can be family members and not the person who has to drive the agenda and determine and document next steps. You can rely upon your advisors for that. And that's relief for the family leaders to be in their family role. And then lastly, the benefits of being virtual. Prior to pandemic, when virtual was not the only method of engaging, it was viewed as maybe subpar or less impactful than in person. And I agree with that. You know, there's no replacement for in-person dinners and time. However, it's made scheduling much easier. So for college kids that have limited amount of time when they're home over breaks, or someone who lives across the country, it's been a great option to be able to use Zoom or video calls for family meetings. And actually, what I've seen is some of the family members who haven't been as vocal in years past are speaking up more. They're more comfortable in their own domain or wherever they're zooming in from. And as the facilitator, it's easier to see who's presenting or contributing and who's not, because you see the little box that's highlighted. And so if I see that Kristen hasn't been saying much, I can invite her or draw her in. So I think there are some benefits of doing these meetings virtually too.
Thanks, Sarah. I love that. And I particularly love the bringing your heart part. I think that's great. Kevin, the next question's for you. And it's, if we kind of think about how when we start to bring up family meetings to our clients and make suggestions around them, a lot of the times we see some struggles around, you know, how do you know where to start and how do you think through what the objectives should be? Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in most cases we've come across the time to start was probably yesterday, or some point in the past. But I think the one thing I've always have always used, but I think Sarah's kind of formalized it a little bit more for us, is I think a great place to start is with one of the quotes that Sarah shared, which is the biggest problem with communication is either the assumption or illusion that it's happened. And I think, you know, as we've started to work with our clients and share that quote with them and have them reflect on that quote as it pertains to their own situation, I'd say in most cases, if not all of them, they can come up with a couple topics or a couple items that they maybe discussed as a couple or a member of the household is discussed in their own head, but hasn't shared with anybody else in a more formal fashion. So I think that's always a great place to start, right? Is to say, hey, what's out there that I probably assume that has been communicated that hasn't, or maybe even ask that to another family member, because I've been a part of, and we work with multi-generational families and we do discovery meetings. And one thing that always stuck out in my mind is we met with the daughter of a family. She was a grown adult, practicing professional, had her own great career. And we asked her what her biggest concern was. And she said, I'm concerned about my parents' long-term financial success and, you know, what happens to them as they get older. What do we do about long-term care costs? Her biggest concern was her parents. And we sat down and had a similar meeting with her parents. And we asked them what their biggest concern was. And they said, we just don't know if our daughter's going to be okay financially. And, you know, we were sitting in the seat of knowing that both are perfectly financially solvent and will have good financial success moving forward. Just those lines of communication had never been open. Those things had never been talked about. So that was kind of a neat learning experience for us, is to bring those two parties together and say, hey, I think there's some things you should probably talk about. So I think that's a great place to start, is just to say, hey, if something happened to me today, what are the things that we want to make sure everybody knows and is on board with? So I think that's a great place to start. And then I think the objectives, I think, to me, it's, if you can get a good conversation going, that's should be the main objective. But I think a lot of it starts on what type of conversations you've had in the past. If you're starting from a place where not many conversations have happened, I'm certainly a big fan of keeping the objectives on a high level. And I've been part of a couple meetings where it was, a lot of the parents kind of sharing, hey, this is how we got here. Here's the values we've had over our lives. Here's the disciplines we use to get to where we're at, and here's what we hope we can help instill upon future generations as well. And then, say for families that have covered more of the basics, certainly we've seen a lot more topical conversations in terms of some of the items that Sarah mentioned around charitable giving or estate planning, the common conversation around what to do if something happens to one of us, or retirement planning, or even education planning for grandchildren, or those type of things. So I think those can all be great places to start and continue conversations.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think it really does matter just where you're at currently and where you want to be, and then kind of set your objectives accordingly. Just want to give everybody a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A. As I mentioned, we'll incorporate them in the discussion here. So please don't be shy. Those will go directly to the panelists here. Bill, the next question's for you. I think data is so interesting because it's real, it's tangible, and it tells stories, right? And one of the statistics that Sarah talked about earlier is the success rate around estate transitions. Can you talk about how you have seen this in your interaction with clients?
Yeah, I feel that when we have family meetings, whether it's just an estate planning meeting or if it's a whole host of characters, they fall into one of three categories. The first one is where the owner of the business or the patriarch dictates what's going on. Okay, this is what I want. This is what's going to happen, and sort of take it or leave it. The other one, one of the other ones, is where the kids dictate. Maybe the owner or the parent is getting older, and the kids are saying, well, this is what should be, and this is what mom and dad want. And in both of those scenarios are very dysfunctional. The best scenario is where there's free talk back and forth about the values, as Sarah talked about, bringing the heart to the table and having open discussions with everyone. So a lot of times, we've got, as attorneys, we've got to watch out who is the client. So if the kids are dictating what should be done, then we have a problem with who is the client. Is it really what the parents want? Is it something that they're being forced to accept? And that gets to be a little challenging. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that these family meetings that we have are, again, to foster the legacy of the family and to have a critical path of what's going to happen, in, at least on our end, estate planning wise. When we find that there's acrimony after the death of one of the parents, it's usually because one of the kids expected something and they weren't getting it in the will or the trust or the business, whatever. Many times you have a business that's run by the parents, and one of the kids is in the business and the other kids aren't. And of course, the natural heir to the business would be the one that's in it. And so the other kids feel, well, he got the business. What do we get? And there's plans to compensate the other people, obviously. But if there's surprises, that's where you find contested estates and a lot of money spent on attorneys, and families break up, never to talk again. So again, these family meetings are really, really important, and it's important to make sure that there's a free flow of information that, or at least values that everyone shares. So.
Yeah, I think that's the last thing anybody wants, right? Is to create division and headaches and all that upon passing. So,
Except for the litigators, the attorneys.
True. Sarah, I think one of the things that you've helped Kevin and I with over the years is just understanding the difference between the word transfer and transition, and why this is so important. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is and why it's important? Oh, you're on mute.
You would think I'd have that sorted by this time, but my dog was barking. So excuse me if you heard that earlier. I do think that transfer and transition are both very important when we're thinking about family meetings and future plans. And I'll describe my definition of both of them and then talk more about why I think they both have an important role. Transfer, to me, or according to the definition, is the act of parties by which the title of property is conveyed from one person to another. So that's transfer, and it's very important. Equally important is transition, the passage from one state to another, and a movement, development, or stage and style to another. So they need to work together. There will be a transfer. How can we incorporate transition into the transfer so that it's not just an event? There are many little conversations, many family meetings over the years. People, the rising generation, your next generation, reaching their full potential, assuming responsibilities gradually. And so that's why I believe that transfer and transition play an important role in adequately preparing for the future.
Yeah, it's just a small difference in the word, but the meaning is important. We do have a question from the audience, and Bill, I think this might be best fit for you. But the question is, should meetings be recorded? It might be helpful when revisiting the parent's intent. Have you seen this come to play in your actions with clients?
I have never seen the meetings recorded. I think that has to be agreed upon by all parties. I can see an argument for it that, hey, what was that point that was made by the estate planning attorney or the accountant or something like that? I can see that as being certainly a good argument for having them recorded. Sometimes when you do record meetings, people aren't as free to talk about what's going on with them. So there's arguments on both sides. And I think it's just whatever all of the parties are comfortable with will dictate whether you record them or not.
If I may add on to that, I agree with everything that Bill said. What I've seen some families do is rather than record the actual meeting, they'll record an interview. So it's not the back and forth to and fro that's being recorded. It's more of an interview, the story or the intent or the wishes, so that there is a video memorialization of those words that future generations can watch, replay, and remember where they came from.
Great.
So more of the family history.
That's something that would be shared kind of post or during life, either one. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen that be a next step of a family meeting.
Sarah, I think, and I'm thinking through family meetings and my family and what it could look like. And I think something we're all probably, that comes up as we're all having the same sort of thoughts is what kind of conflicts could arise. Like, I don't think we're envisioning, you know, food flying across the kitchen table, but understanding that there are conflicts that could arise in these types of meetings. Do you have any suggestions on how to handle conflicts that come up?
Yeah, you know, I think that there needs to be some self-reflection and self-assessment of your own family situation. And that's why I wanted to acknowledge at the outset that family meetings are not right for everyone. If you think that a family meeting is going to exacerbate or make issues that are unresolved or unaddressed worse, then it's probably not the right time yet. And maybe it won't be a good time ever. We're certainly not looking to suggest something that will make matters more difficult for you.
Yeah, I think something else you've helped us with it and mentioned it before was just having a moderator, having a third party there to help kind of drive it if that would be beneficial.
That's a great point. Yes, having third parties, like Bill suggested, can go a long way in keeping things on the up and up and hopefully more neutral and less contentious.
And we're nearing the end of our question list. So just a reminder, if anybody has something to add to please contribute. Thank you for those who've added some questions so far. Kevin, I think, you know, just how do you know if a family meeting is successful and what are some indicators that might point this out?
Yeah, in my experience, it can be difficult to gauge how impactful these meetings can be for different family members. And I say, especially during the actual meeting itself. I think, like Sarah pointed out, is some family members are more open right away and engaged in the meeting. Others are not. But I don't think that's necessarily the only indications of if the meeting's gone well. I very strongly believe that follow-up conversations are needed to gauge the true impact of the meeting. It's something I try to do with all the clients we run through family meetings, is to have a follow-up conversation with the person that initiated the meeting and encourage them to say, hey, you know, make sure you take some time to ask individually the family members how they felt the meeting went, and what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, you know, how it could maybe be better in the future. And you know, I think that can lead to a little bit more openness. Like, you know, Bill mentioned, if the video is recorded, people can tend to be a little bit less open. I think in larger groups, even amongst your own family, people are less open. You know, every extra person that's there probably a little bit less open. So I think those follow-up conversations are extremely important. I recently followed up with a client after a family meeting to inquire about how he felt it went. It's hard for me to tell. His daughter was really engaged, but he had continually told me, my daughter doesn't care anything about finances. She may seem like she does, but there's no follow-up there. And then the son was just kind of quiet, and it was kind of hard to crack. But you know, he's very knowledgeable when it comes to financial matters. So when I was talking to the client, he said the greatest impact and feedback he actually got wasn't from either of his own kids. It was from his daughter-in-law. So it was from his son's wife, and she had pulled him aside at a family get-together and told him how great it was that their family was having these conversations and were so open about talking about finances. And she had just shared with our client that her family wasn't like that at all. They don't like to talk about finances. There's kind of a curtain around that. And that's just something that's always brought his daughter-in-law a lot of anxiety. And I think it kind of in a backward way made our client feel very, very comfortable and happy and even proud that he was having these conversations and wasn't putting that additional stress on his children of not knowing what challenges or opportunities may be down the road. So I think that's you know, a couple ways that I've found to determine whether those meetings were meaningful or successful. And I think, as Sarah mentioned, if you can have an agenda that drives next steps, that certainly can make them more meaningful as well, because there's always a progression and something to continue to work towards over the course of time.
Yeah, great.
And I guess one other thing to add would be is, I think one thing we've seen is with a lot of, adult children that we work with, our clients with, is that, after we have these initial conversations, it's one or two of the kids reaches out to us about a specific topic that they have questions around. Maybe it's a retirement plan at work, or setting up an education plan for their kid, or just saying, hey, I need to do my own financial planning. So I think we've seen that break down some of the barriers in terms of a lot of younger folks being a little hesitant to reach out to professionals for help. So I think that's another benefit we've seen, and an indicator of success as well.
Yeah, definitely. We have another question that came in through the attendees. And I'll let you guys kind of decide who wants to take this. Most of the discussion has been on the older generation willing to bring in the next generation into a family meeting. How do you handle when a younger generation wants to initiate family meetings and the older generation is hesitant to participate?
I'm going to defer to Sarah on that one.
That is an excellent question, and I really appreciate you suggesting that we talk about this. As I was mentioning in the research that UBS did a couple of years back, it can be uncomfortable, but I don't think that's a reason to not suggest it. Sometimes positioning things around how you've seen some of your friends handle this and why it was important for them, and that you're not trying to be nosy or predetermine decisions for them, just that you want to make sure that you're having open dialogue and conversation around what matters to them, so that you can be sure to take care of everything. I think approaching things with empathy. But I'll never forget traveling to Ohio for a meeting, and I was talking about family meetings, and the patriarch said to me quite bluntly, "Thank you for making the trip. For as long as I'm alive, my family knows the rules of engagement." And so that was a good reminder for me that family meetings are not in the realm of possibility for all people. But I do think it's worth trying and approaching the conversation with empathy and patience.
I could probably add a little bit there as I think about my own family situation. My parents have long been divorced, and I actually work with my father. He's a financial advisor also. But I commonly go back to him and I say, Dad, I need the latest iteration of what you're thinking, because it's changed over the course of time. It's not necessarily documented as well as it should be. And I told him, I said, it just, he has another relationship that he's a part of, and that's perfectly fine. But there's specific things that I know he wants to happen and not to happen if something were to happen to him. So I've always approached it as, hey, help me out here, so that I best can carry out your wishes, because times change over the course of time. And so I tried to periodically, every 12, 18 months, just go back to him and say, what, we need to have this conversation again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, and nothing's left unturned, and we haven't assumed that something's been communicated that hasn't been.
Great.
If I can put my elder law hat on, many times the older adult is the one that needs to be talked, at least have the discussion with, and the son or daughter is a little bit hesitant to talk to them about not only monies, but more often long-term care, what they want at end of life, whether they want life-sustaining treatment, those type of issues. And we have found that what we call a geriatric care manager, who is an expert in, basically a social worker that deals with the geriatric population, can be a nice vehicle to bring both these generations together to talk about those difficult things. Because let's face it, talking about what do you want when you're lingering, or if death is imminent, is a hard thing to bring up to your parents. And but it needs to be brought up, because you want to do what they want to do. So geriatric care manager can be a nice tool to facilitate that conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Along the lines of tools, I think, Sarah, you and your team have put a lot of work into developing very useful tools. Can you share a little bit about what some of those are and if we can share those?
They're always within reach, and so I'd like to show them. We often use two very simple communication-based tools to offer a structure to the self-reflection and then the sharing amongst a group. And the first one is called the purposeful dialogue, leading your family forward. It's really simple. The first exercise is about discovering your why, deciding what's important in life, and that's all about values. There are 29 value words and a 30th write your own. And the intent here is to be able to share with your family, what are your motivating values and what doesn't motivate you? And then we can use that as a basis to focus on collective strengths and understand each person's worldview. The second part of the exercise has to do with picturing your life the way that you see it, bringing in individual perspective. And this one corresponds to 30 images that you can use in a variety of ways. It could be from the personal perspective of, what do you want for the future? Or what do we want our family legacy to be? Or just this past weekend, I was in a family meeting where we're working with a family who started a foundation, and we were talking about, what do they want their philanthropic mission to be? So these communication-based exercises can serve a lot of different purpose. Most of all, they lead to conversation. And then real quickly, we have another communication-based exercise called Sustainable Development Goals, which is more philanthropy focused. We're always looking to get the whole family engaged and conversing, because that's where we can all learn and make progress.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think if anybody else has any questions, feel free to throw them in. But at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Kevin, and I appreciate all of your participations and willingness to share your insights and experiences and for the questions that were asked.
Thanks, Kristen, and thanks, Sarah, a lot. I always learn a lot from these conversations as well, so thank you. I picked up a couple tidbits to add into our conversations as well. And I'd say to the participants out there, if any of these tools would be helpful for your own conversations, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to Bill's team, and they can put us in contact with one another. I think those communication-based exercises are great, and we've seen them lead to some great conversations. We also have some templates around agendas and family meeting structures that we'd be happy to share as well. So please don't hesitate to use this as a resource as you endeavor and having these conversations with your own family. I think in closing, to sum it all up, I think whether your family is dealing with newfound wealth, whether you're introducing new members into the fold over the near or shorter term, preparing for the end of life, or simply trying to enhance your family's legacy, we want you to imagine kind of sitting around a table with your entire family, having a deeper level of connection and communication, which leads to a greater understanding of each other's values and vision. And we really feel if that's possible, your family can really truly benefit from the power of intentional communication amongst family members. So I think we'll leave it there. Bill, any closing remarks that you'd like to add on? Certainly appreciate you having us.
I just want to thank you, Kevin, Sarah, and Kristen for a really, really interesting program. And I want to thank the participants too for tuning in. And again, if there's any questions or any follow-up that needs to be done, you can get a hold of me at my email is wwilson@Wilson LLC. And this fine presentation will end the season for our monthly webinars. We'll start again in September, and we will obviously be sending out notices about that one. So thanks again. Thank you, panelists, and have a great summer.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very
Bill.
much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.